Throughout the past year, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre and former Press Secretary Jen Psaki took numerous shots at former President Trump in the briefing room. Psaki, who left the administration early this year, slammed Trump for his actions on January 6th. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who took over after Psaki departed, mocked the Trump administration for its inability to pass infrastructure legislation. Jean-Pierre also slammed Trump, calling him a liar over remarks he made at a rally about abortion.
And then last week, Talib Singh made some very strong comments, and also Treasury Secretary Yellen made some comments about the positive impact on inflation of lowering tariffs on certain Chinese goods, bicycles, underwear, apparel.
It's quite a list.
Yeah, it's quite a list. Is there something cooking? Can you tell us something? And do you know, is the White House embracing that? Is that something we could see happen soon?
So from the beginning of the administration, we talked about how some of the tariffs implemented by the previous administration were not strategic and instead raised cost on Americans. And our effort, which has been ongoing, of course, has been to ensure current Section 301 tariffs align appropriately with our economic and trade priorities. And you mentioned, different goods that are sold, but of course on wages and job opportunities, critical supply chains where we see critical impacts on critical supply chains, our ability to sustain our technological edge. This is an ongoing process, and we're certainly looking at where we see costs being raised. And a time where we're seeing heightened inflation, certainly that's on our minds. It's also about addressing the core issues we have with how China has approached, their engagement around economic issues as well. So it's both.
So can we look for some tariff reductions in some relatively short period of time?
We're continuing to review it. I don't have anything at this moment to preview for you, but our focus is on those same categories and areas where we can impact, where we think they're impacting wages and job opportunities, our technological edge. That's the prism through which our economic team, Ambassador Tai is of course leading this effort, is reviewing these sanctions.
And then just a real quick one on Putin.
President's comments last night. He went off about MAGA again.
Yeah. MAGA King.
Yes,
King
he
MAGA.
referred to former President Trump as the ultra MAGA king. He's been decrying ultra MAGA Republicans and saying he's going to be doing it more. But Hillary Clinton expressed some regret not too long ago for referring to Trump voters as deplorables who couldn't be redeemed. And considering that Trump got 74 million votes in the last election, I'm just wondering if this is the best strategy for Biden to win over support ahead of the midterms, especially given his inaugural theme being America United.
Well, I would say that the president is not afraid to call out what he sees as extreme positions that are out of line with where the American people stand, and whether that is supporting a tax plan that will raise taxes on 75 million Americans making less than $100,000 a year, or whether it is supporting efforts to overturn Roe v. Wade, something that 2/3 of the American people, in a Fox News poll, may I add, supported. And there are countless examples from there. The president believes that there is still work we can do together. The Bipartisan Innovation Act is a good example of that. But again, he is not going to stand back and stand aside while people are pushing for extreme positions that are not in the interests or supported by the vast majority of the American people.
On inflation today, Ro Khanna, just sort of feeding into his comments about from last night about inflation. The president was talking about the economy when he was referring to ultra MAGA. And Ro Khanna said today that blaming Putin may not be effective. He said, we need to say inflation's a real threat, it's an emergency. So it seems like the president has been rationing up this rhetoric, blaming Republicans, blaming Putin. We've heard all of the reasons why the pandemic is a factor. But Ro Khanna is asking, this White House to call inflation an emergency and to call out the National Guard to help with supply chains. Are those things that you'd consider, this White House would consider?
Jackie, I don't think anyone doesn't think inflation is an issue. The president has said that countless times. The question is, it doesn't matter what you call it. The president just gave a speech on it yesterday. The question is, what is your plan to address it? He laid out a multi-part plan yesterday. He has taken a range of steps, including steps and even announced this week to lower the price of high-speed internet for tens of millions of Americans, to give farmers the tools and resources they need to boost production, to lower the deficit, something that happened on his watch last year, which will help, to release 1 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, to fix the family glitch. What is the plan on the other side? We all recognize it's a problem, but if you open the cupboard door, there's nothing there, and that's the issue. Go ahead.
Jen, the flags are flying at half.
The transparency question I have. In 2017 and 2018, the president routed $13 million of income through S corporations. There are some ethics experts who are calling on him to divulge the specific sources of income in those revenue streams. Richard Painter, who ran for the Senate as a Democrat, has been among those who are calling for this. Will President Biden be releasing the sources of income that were in that $13 million, particularly as there's attention being paid to his son and whether he earned any money from his businesses?
Well, again, the president doesn't have dealings with his family members about business, and he has released decades of tax returns, which is more than I can say for his predecessor.
Okay. All right, guys. I'll take one more question. Go ahead, Chris, because I haven't called on you in a while.
Thank you. So yesterday in his speech, the president said you can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy, and he also said you can't be pro-insurrection and pro-America. There's Democrats across the country that are spending money supporting these candidates, basically. What does the president think of that?
Can you say that there are
There's
Democrats
across the country who are supporting some of these candidates in primaries.
like Democrats, like Americans, like everyday Americans, or elected officials?
Elected officials and candidates.
So I can't. I mean, I'm not going to speak to that. Especially as we're looking at an election or anything that's related to potential midterms. It's not something that I can speak that from here. But I do want to make very clear what the president did yesterday, and he has said this before when he has talked about what the former president, his predecessor, how much he bears responsibility for what happened on January 6th in 2020. There was. His predecessor, Donald Trump, had an opportunity to be on the side of democracy, but instead, he was on the side of the mob. And let's not forget what happened to the law enforcement on that day, the heroism that we saw. They're supposed to be protecting our streets, and here we have law enforcement that was protecting our democracy. And while they were doing that, they were being assaulted, they were being attacked, and by a mob that the former president clearly supported. And so what the president wanted to do yesterday, he took the opportunity while he was in front of law enforcement, clearly via video. He was supposed to be in person yesterday in Orlando, and he took that opportunity to thank them for their heroism and also to compare their bravery to the lack of courage that we saw from the former president. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
And then on Puerto Rico, I was just curious, you spoke at the top about kind of the emergency response, but there's some kind of endemic infrastructure issues that have led to the reasons why Puerto Rico has such a weak grid. And I'm just curious, why, given this administration's focus on infrastructure, the infrastructure bill, et cetera, why more hasn't been done to shore that up, and what your plans are there?
So just on the grid, just to give you a little bit on the update that we have, is damage assessments are currently underway, but due to the scope and magnitude of the outage, full power restoration will take at least several days. But on anything specific to that and the power and the restoration, definitely would refer you back to Department of Energy. Look, to your point, this is why the bipartisan infrastructure law was so critical and so historic and important as we're dealing with infrastructure and dealing with grids, dealing with our bridges, our tunnels, the things that is going to just not only make us competitive just globally, but also deal with these types of, when you have a extreme weather, making sure that we are able to endure and have an infrastructure that holds up. And so again, this is the importance of this historic bipartisan infrastructure legislation. We will continue to have conversations with the local government in Puerto Rico. Our team continues to do that. I don't have any specific numbers on how funding is going to be able to help Puerto Rico in the long long run, but this is something that the president has talked about for some time. We've heard from, the last administration, it was a joke about how we were going to improve our infrastructure. This is a president, along with Congress, that made it happen because of his leadership. So again, we're going to help Puerto Rico in the best way that we can. We're going to continue to be in touch with them and see how we can get them into a better place as it relates to their infrastructure.
Thank you, Karine. At a rally in Sioux City, Iowa on Thursday, former President Donald Trump said the radical Democrats are locking up pro-life activists, persecuting their political opponents. Just what is your White House response?
Clearly, that's not true. I'm not going to say more than that. It's just not true. It's false. It's a lie. It's not true. So I'm going to move on.
Though that pro-life activists are being persecuted, and in the meantime, like pro-life pregnancy centers are being attacked.
It's
and
not.
those...
That is just not something that I'm going to comment from here about what the former president said. It is, just not going to get any further. I'm just not going to get any further. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. Okay. Can I ask you to just flesh out some of the desired deliverables from these upcoming summits, starting with COP27, the call from developing nations for $100 billion to address, I believe the term is loss and damage. How far is the U.S. prepared to go on that and to respond to that? And then looking at ASEAN and G20, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, is the U.S. prepared to welcome Canada or any other deliverables for these summits?
So I know there's a lot of questions on this. It's happening in just a couple of days where the president's going to leave on this foreign trip. We're working on getting Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, in the briefing room this week, where he will lay out the goals the president has for this particular trip. Not going to get ahead of the National Security Advisor, but we will share more. We'll have more to share. Okay?